We have Tim here and me. Dana has a patient in the ER. She's going to try and be on. I should just text her back and say, please, by all means, don't bother if you don't have to. But anyway, she may or may not be able to join us as she can. We're going to call this to order here in a second. We'll bring the city council meeting to order. Then Gabby will bring the planning and zoning to order. And once we do that, then I'll have a couple of quick statements. But at this time, it is 6:01, and we'll call this work session to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Hill.
Present.
Councilmember Larson.
Here.
Present. Shannon's here. She raised her hand.
I can't hear the clerk.
Is this better?
Maybe.
She's behind the screen, so
Okay.
it should be very good.
Where's the microphone? It's right there.
Mayor Lobby
Here,
and Mayor Pro Tem Green is absent for now.
right.
Sharon, can you hear everyone else at the table?
Yeah, Gabby, I can hear you and Greg just fine. Thank you.
Okay, Gabby, if you would call the.
Okay, I will call to order the planning and zoning work session meeting of city council on February 28th, 6:01. We get a roll call, please.
Mayor Lobby,
Here,
Commissioner Law, Chair Buller,
Here.
Commissioner Bauer,
here.
Commissioner Zoo, Commissioner Ducharme,
Here.
Commissioner Knus,
Here.
and Alderman Edwards.
Here. Excellent,
Okay.
thank you.
What were the housekeeping matters? Did you have? some-
Well, first, we'll ask for approval of the agenda. Is there anything anybody would like to add to the agenda? Although we have a pretty tight agenda tonight, so I would suggest we not add anything. That's just my thought.
I would say I hope we're done before 8:15.
I would hope so.
I was thinking more like 7:30.
I was thinking 6:45. Here's Christian. Please record Christian as being present.
That's my only, amendment to the agenda is maybe trying to wrap it up by 7:30.
I have no problem with that, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
So at this time, no objection to the agenda, and we'll go forward. Housekeeping matters, I don't know, we should be having housekeeping matters in a work session anyway, so I'm gonna skip that if it's okay with you. This time, public comments, from the public on items not on the agenda. Anybody in the public, either in the room or on Zoom, who would like to speak to city council? Hearing none, we'll move on. We have one. Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. Yes, please, go ahead, Tim.
Hi, thank you, Mayor, members of City Council and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I guess I'm here tonight with all three hats on. As you know, I serve as the county manager. I also serve on the Regional Housing Authority Board. I also rent a house on 402 West 4th Street. I listened to the past couple meetings about the ADU discussion, and I know, there's, I don't know to say that there's various different feelings on the Planning and Zoning Commission, but I do want to encourage the thoughtful use of ADUs in our community, especially within city limits, to address our housing stock. I think you have a couple other tools in place that actually would complement that with, well, your STR cap, things that you'll discuss tonight. As one of the largest employers in town, having various housing options is very important to me. Also, as a person who's looking to try and make their home here outside of a rental house, I would live in an ADU. I know, some of my staff would, maybe someday I would build one, but I just want to encourage that the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council does keep considering ADUs and density in the city as another tool to help address our housing crisis.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate it. Anybody else? Yes, please, just
Will
go.
there be space for public comment on the agenda, or would now be? the time?
No, but what we usually do during a work session is give the public an opportunity to chime in at some point.
Okay,
And maybe when it's appropriate, when you feel like it's the subject matter you want to speak on, raise your hand and I'll try to let you fold in your comments where it's appropriate. Is that okay?
yes, thank you.
Good deal. I do want to say, I really want us to keep our eye on the goal tonight, which is to reach consensus on some, if not all of these issues. I think that's not going to be easy because what you're going to get tonight are what I'll call some curveballs in terms of our considerations. I don't want us to go too far astray from the subject because it's going to be very easy to go down the rabbit hole of some of these conversations, and you'll see what I mean here. Pretty quickly. So I want to try and limit discussion to the degree that we possibly can on any one given subject so we can get something accomplished tonight. I'll do some time checks from time to time and try and keep us on track if that's possible. I know it's hurting cats. I get it. So at this time, we'd like to open the conversation. Chapin, would you set the stage for us?
Sure, yeah, I wanted to just briefly introduce this topic. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did request this work session. The timeliness of this is the May 1st is the time period. It's in the date that's in our code when we get updated numbers from the county, which could potentially update our number of licenses that become available. So the Planning and Zoning Commission met last week and had a work sessions regarding the kinds of things that we want to talk about with council tonight, which I have included in your packet on page 2 of 2, short packet tonight. So there are 4 discussion items that the PNC would like to discuss with council. So I'll quickly introduce those. The first is regarding, these are all questions, but the first is regarding whether or not we should continue to have a percentage cap, or we should have a fixed cap on the number of licenses. The second discussion item is regarding the density of STR licenses. So in other words, do we want to have a limit of number of licenses per block or per neighborhood? The third question would be whether or not conditional use permits should continue to be required for STRs. And the consideration on that, I'll go into just really quickly, is that the table of use amendments that have been in works for about 5 years now, the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council held a joint work session to review these on November 15th. The current proposed amendments removes that CUP requirement from the code so that STRs would be solely regulated by Title V business licensing. So that's the question. So do we want to continue requiring conditional use permits as is in the code right now, or remove that requirement as is in the table of use updates? We'd also like further clarification on whether the CUP requirement should be distinguished between class 1 and class 2. Last question is how consistent should we aim for our STR licensing to be consistent with Lake County regulations? In the memo that I provided, it didn't include statistics provided from the Deputy City Clerk's office on active licenses. So the number of licenses that can be issued at any one time is 171. So that's the 12% number of the 22 residential parcels. We'll get into parcels versus units here in a second. So that's 18 class 1 licenses owner occupied and 152 non-owner occupied class 2 licenses. There's currently a wait list of 8 licenses. So I did email out to the Planning and Zoning Commission the number of licenses that, the number of residential parcels that the county is providing. And I believe that was also provided to the council as well. That list currently, this is something we need to clarify with the assessor's office, because that list currently shows 653 residential parcels, which we have requested some clarification on, because we believe there are certainly more residential units in the county, or I'm sorry, within the city, if not residential parcels also. So that requires further clarification. We are in the process of working on that with the assessor's office, and we're just waiting to hear back on some additional information there to get that clarified. But that's pretty important information to get, so we plan on setting up some meetings with the assessor's office on that. I think that briefly introduces the discussion.
Thank you. That's kind of the curveball. It's a big one.
Well, I think it's depending on, it's how that data was queried, and we decided not to count like by units. I think we counted it by any parcel that has a residence on it.
But we did
So
that
there-
2 years ago.
Right.
1271.
I know, so I
then-
think one of the big issues is the inconsistency in how we're counting what the denominator is of that 12%
Right.
equation. Because there's no way 671 would put us at 70 something units, 70 something licenses, it wouldn't put us at 170.
Yeah.
So we're being inconsistent in our denominator, which is throwing a wrench into everything.
Well, we're not. I think it's the data.
It's the
we're getting.
data.
The data is wrong. There's no doubt in my
Right.
mind, the data is not just a little bit off, it's off exponentially.
Right, but I think we can still have a good discussion about ideas for the next year regardless.
Right.
If in a world where we had good data, I think we can still talk about the other ideas. To follow Chapin, I wanted to add a couple things that were brought up in our meeting last week from Ting's perspective, and other things that I've heard, that I've been in other meetings, is that the nightly price for Airbnbs has gone way down this year, and sales tax and tourism has been relatively flat. So that's just like the economic, and I don't know if you can chime in on that, but she had some really interesting, and I'm sure, Tim, you probably know that too as a business owner, that like this year has been a little flatter and the nightly price of Airbnb rentals has gone down. I don't really know what the right policy is in that context, but I think that's really important context to have, that a lot of Airbnb owners, they're either not filling as many nights or they're having to lower the price significantly to get their units
Well, I'd
filled.
like to hear the perspective. Maybe you
Yeah,
have
so
a-
I'd be
an opinion on
curious.
Yeah, I can confirm.
Okay,
Things have slowed down for sure since, I mean, I think what happened was COVID was an anomaly. Everyone was escaping the city, and then we had this like insane
Mhm.
tourism, and then now like it's back to where it was before. So things have slowed down quite a bit.
What's interesting is as of right now, sales tax has not slowed down.
right, so what's that story?
It's up 35% over budget, which we were very aggressive. It's 35% over budget, which is
Interesting.
I mean, which is, I don't understand.
Yeah,
Please,
yeah,
please.
please.
Well, I would point out, first of all, that lodging tax dollars. We don't have the final numbers yet, but that's looking like probably down around 20% for 2022.
Lodging tax.
For the sales tax.
Wait, last year was the first year for lodging tax. How could it already be down?
Well, we've always had lodging tax,
Oh, I understand what you're saying for just.
tourism panel money,
Gotcha.
yeah, is down. Will probably be down around 20%.
Even though we increased the rate. Is what we're saying, right?
The rate didn't go up.
Well,
We took a
let
portion,
me
yeah.
back up. We projected with the 2A accommodations tax dollars that we would be able to supply $83,000 to the tourism panel. It turned out it's 90,000.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure where the decrease came in. That's not clear to me.
Well, and I should have brought them, I should have added it to the packet. But Colleen has a treasury report that reflects lodging tax will be down for 2022.
Interesting, okay.
As far as the sales tax component is, we're comparing sales tax to numbers that don't include Big R. Big R has just completed a 12-month cycle in the sales tax loop.
And I believe,
So we're comparing those numbers. So numbers where Big R didn't exist.
and I believe that's also true for any online purchases, right?
That's been a couple years since the online.
January
purchases have been
2019,
included.
the online kicked.
2019, okay. I thought it
Yeah,
was-
the Wayfair decision.
Sorry, what's big R?
It's the like mini Walmart type
Oh,
ranching
big
supplies
box
building,
store.
yeah.
So we don't have an
Yes,
apples.
just made a comment.
What's that compared to? Do you have the data from the year before, Tracy? Maybe not.
Yes, you just read it.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
So it went up, not down.
Interesting, okay.
I think, do you think she was calling these 2023 quarterly projections were lower? No.
Well,
I can't-
that's sales tax, but that's not what's coming down to the tourism panel.
Well, we can make sure to clarify that. But I think the nightly average price is an interesting indicator, and I don't really know, like, I'm not an economist, but part of me thinks it's like, does that mean our market is too saturated? Does that mean, like, I don't know what that means.
Okay, let's pull it back to the question at hand. The question at hand really is, we're at 12%. Are we comfortable with that? Should it be a percentage and should we set it a numerical cap? Because the numbers that we're getting that we depend on to base a percentage, we have no faith in. I mean, I'll say for me, I have no faith in them. And they've changed every year pretty dramatically. So where are we on the 12%? Yes, go ahead.
I think, I've been thinking about this one point, and the way I'm thinking about it is. What's the metric or metrics that we're using to measure the efficacy of the cap? Right, so I think there's two parts. One is economic, which we just saw, and the other one is community. And what I think would be a good discussion to have is what's that community metric that we can use to measure like the impact of the 12% cap on the community.
Right.
I think it's a great question.
Yeah, and I
I don't
think-
know how you put a metric on.
But I think that's the density, the zone or by block or by zone district or whatever is so interesting, because if we keep on allowing more licenses. If there's no density metric, those licenses can all concentrate. You could have an entire block of Airbnbs, and I don't know if in a block like that exists. But if we keep on adding incremental licenses, which I'm not totally opposed to, but I'm opposed to them like an entire block being all. Airbnbs, and so then if we're gonna incrementally add, that's where I think that community impact thing comes from. Like, how do we mitigate that impact to neighborhoods?
I will say that a lot of that data is just gonna be qualitative data and anecdotal data. That's just the way of the land. That's the way that you have to go without spending a fair amount of money in that. And looking through that. A lot of my job at Full Circle was collecting data and analyzing data. And I can tell you, using anecdotal and qualitative data isn't always bad. It's totally okay. So in this case, I think all of us have probably heard of those stories of, dude, my block doesn't exist anymore. It's all Airbnb. So that density surely does hold up. And I think that conversation is much easier to have. The problem is that percentage would that. I'm with Mayor that even if the numbers were to be consistent, I honestly don't see a point in having that exponential increase, not exponential, but proportional increase comparative to what we have. I think what we have right now is more than enough, to be honest. And it feels like letting it grow, even if it's proportional to the amount of houses that we grow, isn't quite the best option, given that we know that most houses that are growing aren't houses for us, right? All the rail yard projects weren't houses that any of us in this room could buy. Same's true if Leadville 7 were to go through at the proposed area that it was previously. Obviously, they've retracted their their thing, but if, let's suppose, some project like that were to go through, all those houses again would not serve our community in any meaningful way. So to then also increase the short-term rentals alongside with that seems to me like a slippery slope and it feels like a numerical number and just sticking to it and saying, hey, maybe we increase it by 10 because that's what we have the capacity for. Seems a lot safer to me while giving us the ability to increase it if we see that fit.
Mhm.
So whereas percentage, we don't really have control over what it
Yeah.
increases
Right.
to.
Cisco, go ahead. You have a comment?
Yeah, thanks. So I think about housing from a lot of angles. I'm on the Housing Authority Board. But tonight I want to bring more of a perspective from a hotel, Freight. Elsa couldn't be here tonight because they're hosting the EDC.
Right.
The current environment of lodging is hard for a hotel to compete with the short-term rentals. I do think it's hard for current hotels, like sometimes we'll look, Freight will not be full, but it seems like all the short-term rentals on one platform or another are booked, so. And I know that that's not entirely direct, but that is happening on certain nights and weekends in our community. So it's hard for current hotels, and I think it is probably a intimidating space for a new hotel to want to come into. And I do think it is a healthier future and healthier community when our guests and our visitors, who are super important to us, stay in commercial spaces and hotels like that than residential, so that the people who live here can stay in the residential. And I think the current global market forces are pushing the other direction. I mean, Airbnb and VRBO are hugely successful. Like those are big forces. So I do think that if we want to help hotels and help future hotels thrive here, the number of 12% as it is now doesn't seem to help that. So if it is a percentage, it feels like it needs to come down. If it is a solid number, even then, I think it'd be good to consider bringing it down. Like from my perspective of housing access, as well as hotel, what's good for hotels. I think the fewer non-owner occupied licenses, the better for those two things. I think owner occupied is a different story, and I'm really grateful and I think it was very smart to distinguish between the two. And I hope that the county copies that. And it doesn't feel like our housing situation has gotten better in the past years, so it's hard for me to imagine more licenses going out. And I just think the last thing I'll say is, do you all use AirDNA, or like have you considered using AirDNA?
We use MuniRevs. Adam has been talking to us about
Yeah.
AirDNA. And possibly, but he's found an even better resource that he wants to bring to us.
Yeah, Adam
And
is
it's about
considering
half the
buying
price.
this data set that's like the super behind the scenes, every little piece of data that then we could help really shape more
Yeah,
nuanced
that
policy
seems like
decisions.
We are discussing that as a possibility, but we haven't gone any further with that. We'll kind of, wait to see what comes out.
I was gonna say, and Lodging Revs is actually, Donna and Hannah are doing a training right now on it's the Lodging Revs part of Community Revs.
Okay,
They are doing a training right now on compliance and what Lodging Revs can do to identify that if there's properties that are being listed that don't currently have a license.
So we're trying to evolve there. Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to apologize. I'm at work, so I am going to be giving only half a brain to this meeting as often as I can. But I wanted to make 2 points. One is, as we're considering what exactly to do with the short-term rental numbers, to reflect on why we actually went down this path in the first place. And one of the big reasons was to promote or preserve neighborhood cohesion. And the other was to stop some of the spiraling tendency for people to rent out their home short term and compound our housing problem. I think in terms of the economics that Nadine brought up earlier, I don't think that that was ever, I mean, it's undeniably a portion of our municipal economics, but that was never a reason that we decided to regulate short-term rentals in the first place. You know, the fees cover hopefully our administration costs, our administrative costs, and the money that they bring in terms of lodging tax is perhaps a side effect, but not one that should promote our consideration of expanding or managing the short-term rental market. In my mind, I would much rather see it go the route that Cisco mentioned through hotels rather than expanding the short-term rentals. So aside from that, Lori sent out the chart of what other towns are doing, and it's not a perfect comparison, but again, because I don't know exactly how to interpret the residents numbers, but if I go, there's 3 cities on that chart that she sent out: Estes Park, Telluride, and Ouray. And if I go just sort of Google search, like how many residences are in this municipality, with the limits, the numeric or percentage limits that those 3 places have put on, Estes Park has a limit of approximately 10%. Telluride is currently holding at 750 licenses, which puts them at, would put them at 30%. I don't know if that includes the mountain village or not. And Ouray would be, depending on which number for residences you continue or consider, would be between 5 and 7%. So my own personal opinion is that 12% is a reasonable number to stick to. And I think that's all I've got to say right now.
Thank you. Shannon, please.
I feel strongly that 12% should be our top, our cap. Why would we want to deplete our housing stock even further by adding more short-term rentals? I feel strongly that we should consider decreasing that number, whether it be to a whole number or by a percentage point. I appreciate the difference in the class 1 and the class 2 and would entertain a change up in that as well. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Shannon. I want to bring us back to the percentage versus hard cap. Let's go there first.
Yeah.
What is the thought process between city council and planning and zoning on whether it should be a percentage or a hard number?
I mean, hard number is, we're not subject to this assessor's data.
The assessor's data is.
And then the other, yeah, first I want to say that I agree with a lot of things Cisco said about the commercially taxed properties versus residentially taxed. And I would really love to push more tourism towards the commercially taxed properties. And the 2 good examples are Salida and Crested Butte. That Salida really ramped down their cap in the residential areas and they kind of let it open in the commercial areas. And it has spurred so much really cool mixed use development with commercial buildings that have some rental units, a lot of rehabbed motels that are really hip and doing really well because they're commercially taxed. And then Crested Butte, when they did their short-term rental ordinance, they got the hoteliers were the people that were like, yeah, we're getting screwed by this. We want there to be a cap so that it's a fair playing field.
Yeah. So we've always looked for the balance.
Right.
We
Yeah,
know
so,
short-term
yeah.
rentals have been a strong economic driver.
Exactly. And I don't want to take that away entirely.
We don't.
Yeah, and the one other point I wanted to make is that right now, I'm a strong believer the waiting list needs to be just long enough that it doesn't create that speculative buying where people say, oh, I can buy this house, put $100 grand, fix it up, make it real nice, turn it into an Airbnb. And right now our waiting list is too short. That people are typically getting off the waiting list in a year or 2. So it's still worth their money to buy a house and flip it and turn it into an Airbnb. And I feel like that waiting list needs to be long enough to deter that.
How
kind
do
of.
we get there?
I think a flat number gets us there. I think that
Okay,
the percentage
yeah.
is just, we're giving just enough night licenses per year that waiting list is just every couple of years is like every year or 2 is getting.
If that flat number is in code, maybe the number itself is by reference. I'm trying to think of ways where you don't have to change code every time you want to change that number. And you had made a suggestion today about a possible percentage.
Right,
increase.
so right now you're 12%, so it sounds like people are at least that number or less. And so that number is 171. So what you could say is, the current number, and if you wanted to have there be an increase over time, instead of tying it to our concern is tying it to inaccurate
We can
data.
just tie it to
Wait,
the
can
ones that you got, go ahead.
You need to, like, just let me finish. You can just say it's a percent increase on the cap, right? So you have a numerical cap and you can say it's 171, because you probably don't want to take any licenses away from anybody, so it would be
You could retire them.
171. And then you could say there's a percent increase over whatever period of time you want to make it. So that way, you're not tying it to data, but it's also could increase over time, but not sort of unpredictably right now. So the data has been unpredictable. And we think potentially needs some clarification, at least this year. So that way economically, you can still allow some growth of short-term rental, but it is something that is predictable.
So I guess my worry, again, I'm gonna circle back to this, and I'm sorry, it sounds like a broken record, but it's just very important for our community. We are losing workforce housing when these increase. That's just the reality of it. A lot of these people, as you said, come in, fix up old houses that would be ideal for workforce housing. Jack up the prices, either sell to just dip, or they short-term rental them. That's just the reality of the situation we live in. So to increase them with stock that is not for our community just seems a little backwards to me. We're saying, hey, these new developments, let's say 20 houses, that adds a certain amount of houses to our short-term rental list, which are going to be most likely old units that they're going to remodel for $100,000 to be able to short-term rental them. To me, a percentage just makes absolutely no sense in the world where we live in, which is we're not building workforce housing primarily. We're building vacation homes for rich people or other short-term rentals housing. So it makes no sense to then continue to say, hey, we're going to keep increasing this number. And it, to me, seems worth it to say, you know what, we're going to have to go through this long process of going through and changing the code manually, because we're at such a pivotal moment where we could take one way or the other. We can easily become a next Vail, or we can continue being the community that we are. And that's just the reality of it. So to me, playing that safely and having to put the extra work in seems like valid effort to me, given the current crisis that we're in. If it were to all go away magically, we can have the conversation again of going back to a percent.
Okay.
think there
Well,
was
I'll
a-
take it. I have a suggestion to make. Oh, Max, please, go ahead.
A couple things. We're not gonna turn into Vail, we're not gonna turn into Breckenridge, we're not gonna turn into Telluride. You know why? Because we don't have a ski area right in town. Okay, that is a big difference. They have their capacity, their comfortable carrying capacity at Vail per day is over 20,000 people on the slopes. At Breckenridge, it's over 19,000 people per day is their comfortable carrying capacity. Comfortable carrying capacity at Ski Cooper is right now at 2,400 people. So we're one factor less. And Breckenridge and Vail sometimes hold up to 30,000 skiers per day on the mountain. 30,000 skiers. Okay.
Max, pull it back.
I'm just telling you, we're not going to be a Vail, Breckenridge, or anything.
Okay. Got
Once
it.
again, we are, my personal take on this is we're a fast food nation, meaning we want instant gratification. We want to go up to the actual drive-through and get our taco at Taco Bell right away. We've only had this in our long, deep term understanding of what this 12% cap can do or not do. We've only done it for a year or two now, and we just reached the cap. I personally am not a fan of short-term rentals, but I do know that there's people out there and there is a need for it. And yes, we need affordable housing, right? But we're talking about 12 units per 100 right now. And so yes, is it taking away from our stock? Perhaps, but I just don't think I still think I personally want to take a longer view before changing anything. And I agree with Dana right now that I want to stick with a 12% cap. until we get further data on how this is gonna work out.
I'm gonna disagree, and here's why. The data is not reliable. So the percentage cap makes no sense whatsoever. At least not right now, it doesn't. I mean, we can always change in the future if it starts to make sense. I'm gonna throw out a suggestion, and just to get us,
One more, you,
just a second.
okay,
Well, finish my thought. We were at 141 last year. We're at 171 this year. I'm not even sure the data that got us to 171 is accurate. I'm certain the data that would get us to 78 is not accurate. I'm gonna throw out a suggestion that maybe we put the cap at 150. I'm just throwing out ideas right now. And that, yes, no one will lose their license. It would be attrition. And yes, the waiting list will get longer. That's okay with me. That doesn't hurt my feelings. It stops speculative buying based on short-term rentals. And 141 felt like kind of a healthy number to me. And 150, seems like a compromise in there. And then we have to do it in such a way that we can change it year over year if we decide we want to by resolution. So it gives us the flexibility to make change. So that's my suggestion. I mean, I know we've all bantied this about for quite some time, but we have to reach some sort of consensus tonight to go forward. Matt?
I love that idea.
I really like the idea. I just wanted you to expand on that. What would trigger an increase in the future? What's your?
just time. So, or you can do it in a number of different ways. So you could say, let's,
Is it expanded based on housing stock expansion?
just a
Is it
percent.
expanded based
time.
It's kind of like an inflation adjusted gas tax. It's like, if there's some index, whether it's like,
So what you can say is,
So that's my question. What would trigger an increase in the future if we set a solid number?
you could, so these are just options
Yeah.
and our position and staff is to give you options. You all make the policy. Ultimately, the city council makes the policy decisions, but so say you decided to set a fixed number, whatever it is, a cap number. And then you could say, let's say it will go into effect in 2024. You say, fine, it is capped for all of 2024. In 2025, we will allow a X% increase in 2025. And then we will allow an X% increase in 2026. So it's not based on any collection of data, it's just based upon time. So a lot of, the reason you do that is so that there's predictability and then you don't have to go in and change the code every single year. It's written in the code that there's everybody knows. So if you want to do a cap, but you want to allow some flexibility, that's an option. Sounds like my only issue with the current situation is that it's from our perspective, staff's perspective, it is unpredictable because we're not clear that the data is accurate. So it's hard for us to plan. It's hard for people who want to get a short-term rental license to plan. So if you wanted to plan, it's like saying to you, like someone who rents, and they say your rent is X, but your landlord can increase it X% every single year, then you know how to plan and budget. So
Em,
it's
I'm
just an
sorry.
option.
Em, go ahead.
Hi, Mayor, I was doing some math on my phone before you made your comment and got to the same number, which based on what I thought the data was, which was, Gabby, didn't you email earlier and say it was something like 1,200, 1,300 units from a year ago? If we were to go to 150, that would still be a fairly high percentage of that data, and going somewhere like to 100 would be more like 8%, which I think is pretty aggressive. So it just strikes me that with such unreliable data, I feel much more comfortable with a cap than I think I did last time we had this discussion last year. And then I would say, depending on how aggressive we want to be with a cap, somewhere between 125 and 150 would be very interesting and could provide us with more of that anecdotal data that would help us understand if we want to actually add an increase to plan on, like you're saying, Lori, or just leave the cap as is and promote other forms of growth. And I agree with what Cisco said. And just want to also add a comment that having more hotel opportunity here I think would provide a more equitable tourist experience, because I could be wrong, but I think that the cost per night of a hotel room is definitely on average less than most Airbnbs. And so it'd be really nice to provide a better spectrum of opportunity for people to visit. Thank you.
Thank you. Cisco, real quick.
Quick question, just when you're talking the number cap, are you talking about class 2 only? Because class 1 is
yeah.
unlimited.
Yeah, class 2 only.
Well,
There's
class 2 and class 1 with 2 or more
Yes.
would still be counted against the cap.
Because class 2 is only at 152 right now. So
Probably because there's a bunch of those class 1 larger properties that have multiple licenses, which add up to that. Yeah, so there you go. That's how
so
you get
that's
to the
what the 18
171.
is, a class 1 with multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so the class 1 without multiple isn't even on here.
right.
Cause that's.
Thank you.
We decided class 1, renting only 1 room. That's it. They're off the table in terms of consideration for caps. That's a private property matter in our mind.
Yeah.
Well, in some odd sense, it doesn't have as much of the impact as we've talked about. So the community impact is, if you have someone living there, there is someone, it's not an empty block. You do have someone who's monitoring the property for noise, traffic, trash, snow removal. So some of that community impact, and they're not displacing a homeowner. So if you're trying to, as the mayor said, balance.
Yes, Shannon, go ahead quickly.
I have 3 quick questions. One is, could you please clarify for me, the 18 are the people that live in their home and just rent a room out?
No,
No, not at all. Those are people that rent at least 2 rooms. They're in their home and rent at least 2 or more.
or it's some of the bigger properties that had to go through the CUP process that have like 3 separate units in a house, and up to, I think the largest one, Mountain Hideaway, has 9 or 10 separate units in a house.
But Mountain Highway is no longer class 1. it's
They're no
class 2.
longer class 1, that's
Right.
correct. But it's a bunch of these properties where they had to go through the CUP process because they were renting out multiple units in the same house. So they were technically treated on a different track, in a different
Okay.
category.
Keep moving.
My second question is, I thought when you were talking about 150, that was a total. I like that number as 150 of the total, not 150 of the class 2s. And the third question is random, not random, it fits into that. Can licenses transfer? So can I own one, sell my house and sell my license?
No.
No.
Thank you.
It
Okay.
sunsets with the sale of the property.
That was a really important part of the regulations when they were written
Okay.
years
I
ago.
want to see if we're even close to a consensus of thought process.
I wanted to just offer a few different perspectives, if that's all right. On the comment about hotels, I think that's just a general trend of what we're seeing across the market. So not just hotels are seeing a drop, it's all vacation rentals. But I do think in general, it is different demographics of people who book hotels versus who book vacation homes. In vacation homes, you see more families who want to be together and are able to cook and prepare meals together. In hotels, you can't. But I also do think that short-term rentals are forcing hotels to elevate their game. Because if you have gone to any of the hotels in town, you know that they need to elevate their game, right? And if we want good hospitality and good tourism in this town, everyone needs to elevate, right, that level. So I don't think that STRs are necessarily a bad thing for commercial, for hotels. If anything, it'll actually compel hotels with good amenities and good hospitality to come to town. And I do think there's generally going to be enough demand for everyone, especially at the 12% cap. One comment on the wait list is that I'm pretty sure that for the entire last year, all real estate agents have been telling potential buyers that the wait list is like 40 to 50 long.
Oh, wow.
Because Sarah Dallas was communicating that a while ago. So I think I think the reason why the wait list is so short right now is because of that, is potential buyers think that the wait list is a lot longer than it actually is.
Uh,
That's a good, that's,
Well, the wait
that's
list
the first I've
clear.
ever heard of that.
So
Yeah.
this is really clear once we added the 30 extra licenses.
Once she was not. I know that.
No, because it went from 140 to 178.
And the wait list totally cleared.
Right, but so,
Which was like,
but no
what
one,
beats the-
but my
And clearly,
point
we
is,
weren't even at the cap, so that's,
Yeah.
that's.
my point is, no one, when it went from 141 to 178, no one communicated this to, like, realtors were still telling people that the wait list was. where it was
That,
before.
that might be true, but that certainly didn't affect the
Okay.
reality of the situation.
I want to get us back on track. I mean, we're
Can I
now
bring up the
45,
last point?
Yeah.
please, quickly.
Thank you, appreciate it. Has anyone spoken to any realtors recently about who's buying in town?
I have not,
Okay,
but.
I just spoke to,
Okay.
like some realtors recently. And the profile of people who are buying in town right now are like luxury buyers. So what's happening, just so everyone is aware, right, is that there's cash deals and people are buying homes for it to be their fifth, sixth, seventh home, and they're gonna sit vacant because they're not getting licenses, and they just want them to use it for their discretionary use, right? So just to your point that it's not taken, it's taken away from, it's not taken away from affordable housing because the demographic of buyers is not such that it would have gone anyway to someone who's gonna live in town.
A follow-up question on that. What are the price points on those? Because I can't imagine some of the homes on the lower price points, people are buying as luxury homes for their fifth or sixth.
Right, and also even if there's a lot of luxury buyers, there's also other buyers too, and I think we need to think about all the different buyers that are.
Right, I just was wondering, do they have a price point on those, on that, for the folks that, the demographic you're describing?
I'm not sure, I didn't ask those,
No, that's okay.
but I think it is something that we need to consider,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I would have to say, me personally, I don't care. I mean, I don't know how to put it.
It's fine.
It's not important to me.
And just for the record, I'm not against,
No.
I'm not, you know, we're on the same page,
I'm
right?
not being argumentative. I'm saying, at this point, the reason we started this ever in the first place was neighborhood character. That was it. Now, it's broadened its scope to a lot of other considerations, economic and otherwise, but we're trying to control. It's there somewhere. I got you. Thank you very much. You know, we're trying to control the very nature of our community. And as part of that, we're trying to protect the economic viability of short-term rentals because they are important. And, you know, and we're trying to possibly attenuate second home sales to the degree that they're dependent on short-term rentals, so that maybe housing stock isn't affected so dramatically. To your point, we can't affect second homeowners. Right. There's no way to do that, but we can affect short-term rentals. So back to the original point here. Do we think that a numerical cap that has flexibility into the future makes more sense than a percentage? That's the first question at hand.
We're taking a straw poll.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I just would like to say, anybody that wants to rescind our current number to a lower amount is gonna create a nightmare. If we're gonna start with a cap number, we're gonna have to start at our current cap.
I totally disagree.
I think the idea is to retire them, so as they're,
Yeah, they get sold.
yeah, as the units are getting sold, as they start going away, we're not removing anyone's
Nope.
title. We're
Christian.
just simply saying we're not involving
Christian.
anyone else.
Christian, the majority of homes, even like there's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath on East Fourth. It is right now for $475,000, 2-bedroom, 1-bath. Okay, we need more affordable housing for our community. That's what we need.
And if
Right.
we keep letting people who are gonna remodel those same homes, turn them into short-term rentals and increase those, we're taking that option away, period. And
And
even
that
if we
is-
don't, even if we
Right
don't.
now have a cap at,
Okay.
that is exceeded.
It's a reasonable conversation, and that's a conversation we're having. So the first question I'm trying to get at is it should be a percentage or a numerical cap at this point. Let's deal with that first.
I haven't heard from Tim.
Cause an increase.
What was that?
Do you wanna, should we take some straw poll votes of kind of what people are in support of? I think that's
I do.
helpful.
Max asked if we could hear from Tim, please.
Okay.
Sure. What I would say is what the policy we developed is successful. Brings visitors to our town, we have what they're looking for. Those visitors in turn come to our businesses, allow our businesses to prosper, allow our local workforce to thrive. And in the meantime, when they're coming to our businesses, we're collecting sales tax, which is a giant part of the city's revenue. And we've done some pretty darn good things with that revenue. We've hired an administrator, we've hired a planning director, we've hired a housing director. We've created a revenue stream for housing. All those things should be celebrated. The policy is so far been successful. And I don't know why we want to make it more restrictive, why we want to make it less successful. I'm not in favor of that. If we're gonna have a hard cap, it should start at 171, where we're at right now. I don't see any point in making it more restrictive.
Okay, thank you. We're still in the same question. Should it be a percentage or a numerical cap? Very quickly, let's hear from, what is that, Shannon?
As a C for cap,
Well, no, so that.
there's a middle way.
Wait,
Maurice-
wait,
yeah.
so people are sort of saying cap, and I think that's what in their mind, they're thinking a numeric cap, but we were also having a percentage cap. So when you say cap, let's just clarify the number or
Okay.
a percentage.
Tracy, numeric or percentage?
Numeric, no percent.
M,
Numeric,
Shannon,
Numeric,
Max,
Can I say it and then say why?
just say it, we'll be fine.
Percentage, because I don't want to change anything right now.
Okay, Dana.
She's working.
She may be
Come
working.
back.
She's sewing someone back together.
Tim,
I would be more inclined to agree with the numeric cap if we didn't take any away.
okay, thank you. Now P and Z. Let's start with Gabby.
Numeric around 150.
I like the percentage.
Okay,
I'm not being numeric.
numeric,
Yes, numeric.
Nadeem,
Percentage, but I would like to add that I'd like to see correct updated figures. So that we can make some more informed decisions.
that's the real problem we have. It's a significant problem.
We've been working on these numbers for a few weeks. And we're still struggling.
Years.
I'm sorry, I have.
Yeah. That's it. We don't have anybody from P and Z on the.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, Em already
Say,
gave her
what
vote.
did you say?
What's that?
I said percentage.
Thank you.
And Mayor, what was yours?
Oh, mine is numeric.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we certainly can't rely on the data, so.
Yeah,
It
we're gonna
needs-
make sure we get everybody.
Needs to be numeric.
You just said numeric.
So what we have is not consensus, as far as I can tell, but we certainly have a preponderance of numeric versus percentage. Now, the next question is, if we think numeric is the right way to go as a group, what is the number? We have, I think Max and Tim both feel like the current number may be the appropriate number. We have others who may feel like that number is pretty high and maybe it shouldn't have been that high in the first place. And maybe it's not the healthiest number. However, it appears to be a healthy number. It doesn't seem to be hurting anybody. Is that the correct number to start with?
And I think one of the things I want to point out to everyone is it may help some of the consternation over the decision-making in this is you don't have to make this decision for eternity.
Right.
And so I think what we're trying to do is make sure we make the right decision for now and continue to evaluate it. So the last time we had a work session on this was in June. And we can continue to have work sessions as we look at, is this working the best for our community? So I think, I guess, don't put the pressure on yourself that this has to be the be all end all decision forever.
Yeah.
That if we can make a decision on what we think is best now, and we get data that turns out that it is not the best decision, we can always revisit it.
Well, also keep in mind, we are on a percentage base right now, 12%. Whatever changes we make probably won't take effect until 2024.
Right.
Okay, so whatever we decide tonight is really just a guidepost for where we want to go sometime during this year. It's still going to be 171 unless we take the assessor's number,
Then
in
it's
which case it's
78.
78. So that's where we're really kind of trapped here. I think.
Well, we're gonna work on getting.
Right, no, that's.
Our planning department is working to get better data on.
I understand, but code says we do it by parcel and they say 658 parcels. And, according to code, we have to drop the number.
We can't, we wouldn't be able
I
to.
don't disagree with you. I'm just saying, as a technicality, we're in a bad spot.
We could change the, I mean, if we needed to, we will get the accurate data, and if we needed to, that's, I
Well,
think we're not.
we're working on 171.
Yep.
That's the number that we based on for people to apply in 2023. So, I think that there is not a consensus, but certainly
Majority.
a majority that a cap is the right number,
Numeric.
a numeric cap. And that it doesn't matter what we discuss tonight, 171 is that number going into next year. Do we agree on that? Okay. We have some work to do during the year to decide, okay, how do we change code to make this work and do it in such a way that gives us flexibility going into the future? Are we all okay with that?
Yeah.
Gabby, please.
Thank you for taking that straw poll. I think it was really helpful, but I'd also like to think about, I feel like we haven't talked about the nuance that Lori brought up of maybe an indexed type of increase, whether that's 3 per year and a flat increase, or whether it's a percentage increase, 2%, 10%, off of like some base number that we decide. So I think that's an interesting thing to explore. And then also I would think that a higher number would be like the 171 or 175 or whatever would be more appropriate if we had other regulations such as the density
That's the next topic.
regulation, because I think
Yeah.
that helps with the community impact
Yes.
piece. So I would love if, once we're kind of done with this piece, to move to that. And then another interesting thing with Tim's comments and the whole ADU discussion is just totally an idea. Like, one of the reasons that we grandfathered in all the ADUs is originally ADUs were not allowed to be short-term rented. And then once we were starting to tackle the short-term rental regulations, we realized half the short-term rentals in town were all ADUs. And so we were like, uh-oh, how do we deal with this situation? We don't want to eliminate
Mhm.
all these existing ADUs. And so they kind of were grandfathered in a way, so we didn't want to fight that
Except
battle.
we did say it's one or the other.
It's one or the other, so that was one thing we came up with, is if you can rent the primary house or the ADU.
We
But we
don't-
could create a rule that like ADUs from 2024, built in 2024 onward, are not allowed to be short-term rented. I mean, just an idea. Like, I'm not gonna die on that hill, but I know that a lot of people are really interested in the ADU conversation and how it intersects with short-term rentals. So that's just an idea that came to me when I was listening to Tim's comments.
Okay, thank you.
And the purpose behind increasing the density with the ADUs is for permanent housing stock or overnight rental housing stock?
Would be, what do you mean? Like, if we're in the future, that people would be able to long-term rent them.
Right.
I mean, most people, like right now, like Morgan, who's an architect and works with a lot of builders, he said the economics of ADUs, right now, construction costs are so high that unless it's gonna be like a luxury short-term rental, that you're gonna be able to really rake that revenue in, nobody's even building ADUs until the economics of that change. So I don't know if it's really an effective policy
Okay.
tool at all.
Real
but-
quick, Max, please.
I'll let Tracy go first and then I'll go.
Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you, Beth. It's just an idea, but what about only increasing the cap 1 unit per 10 workforce housing units?
Was my idea.
Okay, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. That's the best thing I've heard all night. So we do have an issue right now, the reason why I do not want to go backwards with our cap right now is the fact that we don't have that many hotels comparatively. I think you could combine all of our hotels besides the one south of town, which I don't know how many people and families would like to live there, right? Or to stay at the one, what is it, the Roadway Inn? I think that's really the only one with capacity beyond maybe 10 or 12 units. I mean, I guess the Silver Queen, heck, what I'm getting at is we don't have a huge like Hilton or Marriott or Best Western or some sort of branded hotel that people feel comfortable bringing their family to. If I was to go to Leadville, right, with my family, I would not stay in any of our hotels. I would want to go to a short-term rental. And so removing them right now is probably something that we would suffer at for folks that are coming here. I also just want to let you know right today is I'm staying in an Airbnb in Idaho Springs. Okay. They don't have any hotels in Idaho Springs. I'm able to cook and have a hot tub and have a place to call my own and drink coffee. And I think that having short-term rentals for our visitors it's a new norm that people are looking for that type of experience. And we have
We're 7 o'clock. We've got three origin items.
Real quick, thank you for the time check. Max, to your point, what we've heard anecdotally from Salida is when they shut the door on short-term rentals, people built motels. And so to Christian's point, if we don't control short-term rentals, no one's going to build a hotel or a motel here. And
let's cap it. If the straw poll is for a cap and not an increase in percentage, let's cap it and see if Christian's correct and Salida is correct. I don't, I go down to Salida and I can't really think of any new hotels that they've been built in the last 10 years.
But it has happened. We know that from talking to people with Salida. So I think we've made a decision around number one, and that we have some work to do around that. But it's a start. So thank you very much.
I think if we visit 2, 3, and 4 first, before we continue to the number, it would make the number a little bit easier to talk about.
Well, I don't know that we're going to reach a number tonight.
Then that's fine.
And I wish we could, but I don't think we will.
Right. I think the goal is to understand so that P and Z can come up with maybe some options. Like scenario A is blah, 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 and then we craft the recommendation and then bring it to you in more of a formal.
So we move on to number 2. Which is, and this is the one that I think is the most important in terms of thinking about neighborhood impact versus the economics of short-term rentals. They're important. We get it. How does that affect neighborhoods and the impact of neighborhoods? We know that Durango limited to 1 per neighborhood. That's it. I mean, I don't want to go down that road, but that's a pretty dramatic. And Salida did something very similarly. So the question is, should we limit numbers of short-term rentals by neighborhood? And if so, how do we go about that? What does that mean?
I'll offer one staff planning consideration here. The planning conferences that I've been to in the past couple of years, and I'll welcome Gabby to chime in on this from her experience as well. But a lot of the ski communities, mountain town communities in Colorado, everybody's struggling with short-term rentals. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do. Everybody's doing something differently. The communities that I have seen, I can't remember all the names off the top of my head, that are regulating short-term rental licensing by density. Those are communities that traditionally have hotbed areas. They have traditional areas that have always been vacation rentals. So they're placing those strongest density restrictions on those areas that have traditionally been long-term rentals. So they're trying to stop that transition from short-term rental or from long-term rental, to short-term rental. Leadville, I don't know that we could say that Leadville has that same kind of traditional hotbed-based areas that ski towns, bigger ski towns have. So that's one consideration where we might have heard limiting density by block, et cetera, for short-term rental licensing. That's one consideration for why some of those communities are doing that.
I guess to jump to the point and give my personal thoughts. Yes, we certainly should. I walk down 7th anytime I'm going to work, where I drive down it. And 2 blocks down, every other house is a short-term rental. That's just the reality of it. And that's in 7th East alone. I know there are plenty of other neighborhoods where I've heard the exact same story of, I don't have neighbors, I just have short-term rental people who live there and it sucks. And it makes me not want to live here anymore. These are the same people who lived and worked here whose quality of life has been impacted greatly. So I think it is appropriate to set a limitation, especially outside of the business zone area. That if we are targeting the residential, I think it's okay to be a little bit more aggressive, maybe not 1, but 2 or 3 seems like a reasonable number to me. In terms of restrictions to create a little bit more of a sense of community. Obviously, we can't control second homeowners, that's just the reality of it, but at the very least, there is that chance of this limiting any of that going away from people if it already exists.
Okay, any other thoughts?
I just want to be really sensitive to the administrators on this, because this is one of the reasons we didn't touch this issue a couple years ago, is because this is extremely tricky to administer on the clerical end of how you keep track of that, how do you measure it, how do you reuse the zones we already have in our zoning, do we create new zones that are like a couple blocks each, I just want to I just think about the structure of it, and I won't, if we go down this road, we have to be very sensitive to how to keep track of it all in a non-onerous way and how to administer it and make it not super complicated.
Any other thoughts?
And I guess my question is, do we have like a density map of STRs versus non-STRs?
We do
Yeah.
have a heat map of STRs, yeah.
Right, you could probably get a pin, number of licenses per pin, and then you could easily create a density calculation based on that.
So I think what generally is true is the density is mostly in the first 2 blocks off of Harrison Avenue throughout town. And it might be a way to think about it. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas. And then maybe in the first 2 blocks off of Harrison Avenue, it's
Right.
4 per block. You can just make it up.
Some kind
numbers.
of like concentric circle.
And then in the
situation.
next 200
Yeah.
blocks off of Harrison, maybe it's 2 per block or 3 per block. And then in the rest of the residential areas outside of that kind of core, I'll call it, maybe it's 1 per block or 2 per block, something that would allow neighborhoods to feel like they're neighborhoods again. And so I'm just thinking out loud at this point. I'd like to hear from other people on this. Tracy, any thoughts?
I'm kind of with Gabby in terms of, we're not even collecting the appropriate accommodations tax yet. And now you want us to figure out density by block and keep track of that. I'm not sure that's feasible right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think administratively, we don't have the capacity to be able to do that kind of detailed.
I'm not sure I understand why it feels so complicated. I mean,
Well,
what
one, you have to
addresses all-
define what you mean by a block.
Yeah.
Then you already have densities on certain blocks, so that means you have to keep track of, okay, well, this block is currently oversaturated. So you have to have 3 on this block retire before you let a new one on. And every block, imagine like a spreadsheet per block to go from the current regulations to any kind of new regulations. It would just be like a total, I mean, I like the idea of it, but I'm just like, I think administratively it would be really tricky.
I guess maybe I'd like to hear from other people. Administratively, I don't think it'd be that tough.
Highest density of short-term rentals in Leadville right now is in West Park. And West Park's blocks are very different than they are.
The West Park's not in Leadville.
Understood.
Okay, interesting.
But some blocks have 3 houses and some blocks have 8 houses.
Right.
How do you-
Right, that's
how do you
exactly-
manage
Exactly.
that?
You set the standard and then it's an attrition issue. And that's the only way you can handle it.
Yeah, maybe it's a percentage.
I think Scott wanted to chime in.
I was just kind of wondering what other municipalities, like, how do they manage this,
At these conferences that I've been to where I have seen the cities talking about, these resort communities talking about where they are implementing the density by block. They're talking about how their finance department is doing, essentially establishing an overlay zone. Or multiple overlay, one overlay zone that has different zones within it. And so, but it's not necessarily, it's not by block. It is a zone of blocks.
Yeah, it's like a bubble, like this
Yeah.
bubble is a neighborhood preservation bubble, and
Yeah.
this bubble is like tourism bubble, or what, like, that's how Summit County is doing it.
I don't know how that protects an individual neighborhood.
Well, like
An
Summit
individual-
Cove
an
versus
individual block
downtown
could be
Breckenridge
overwhelmed.
versus-
Well,
Yeah.
in this case, I guess the idea of it is as you spoke, creating circles around the 2 block radius of downtown, which does seem to be the concentration of it. So we would make a bubble around the 2 block radius of each surrounding area of downtown, for
It's a
example,
licensing overlay zone of these character areas.
or more like
Yeah,
a
that's a
square.
good way to put
And
it.
that automatically addresses parking and trash and everything else that everybody's so concerned about in a very specific way. It's the biggest problem in the first 2 blocks, and so therefore that's how we regulate it, is specific,
Okay,
specific to nuisance zone, for lack of a better term.
all right. Other thoughts, Max, please.
Mayor, if we're going to cap the number at a specific amount, why do we need to do density to begin with? Are we going to then, if we had a density, tell people on 7th, which we all know has short-term rentals on it, that you have to now, one of you are gonna have to remove your short-term rental and we're gonna give it to somebody
No,
else?
we didn't say it. It would
Mayor,
have
I'm
to be
just
done-
saying, if we're gonna cap the number, why do we have to worry about densities? This seems like we're making things really too complicated right now, if there's just a simple number.
You could be right, but we get back to the idea of neighborhood impacts. You can have 171, but 12 of them could be in 1 block. And so that neighborhood no longer exists. And so the whole point of this from the very beginning was, let's see if we can improve the lifestyle of our community by controlling short-term rentals. So the cap is one way, but it's not adequate to the task, I don't think.
Mayor, I mean, on 7th Street, you have Full Circle, a candy store, and a bunch of other stuff that I'm just saying, it's a little different. There's certain streets that maybe the density is the right thing. It's supposed to be more dense. I'm just saying, I mean, I'm just saying, why are we, I mean, we should try to make this, it's gonna be complicated to begin with. So let's make it as simple as possible, because even making it simple is gonna be complicated. And so I'm just saying, I understand what we're trying to do. But if we're gonna just stick to a number, why are we going to then change this, our code and go through all this additional work when everybody that has a short-term rental has a short-term rental?
That won't change. That doesn't change
It may change.
over
yeah.
time.
Oh,
you
yeah,
bet.
of course it will. Yeah, but if it's a small number and there's more houses for people to have second homes, or heaven forbid, we actually have people that move into our communities, that's great if we have the same number. I'm just saying,
Okay,
let's keep it simple.
thank you. Shannon, yes, please.
I may have lost track of my thought, Max. I was gonna say, we're not changing. If we leave the number at 171, nothing changes. But I've lost it. Never mind. Thank you.
I think, I just want to make clear that none of us are proposing getting rid of anyone's short-term rental, even if we were to decrease the cap to 50. I think none of us are in favor of saying, hey, your short-term rental license gone. It's you sell, you lose your license in one way or another, maybe you violate some codes or whatever the case is, you just can't renew it, plain and simple. At that point, the license is already lost, the person's already moved on. We aren't losing any short-term rentals. We are simply just saying, okay, like, we're not gonna use that anymore. We're not gonna renew this license anywhere in town. And the person, whoever buys it, is gonna have to renew it anyways if they were to also want to implement the short-term rental. So no short-term rental place is going to lose their license unless
For
they sell
clarification,
it.
a new buyer can't renew, a new buyer goes to the back of the line.
Right, to the way.
Just want to make sure we're all.
So what that does, hopefully, discourage speculative buying based on short-term rentals. So that's kind of the point there. Any
Is it
thoughts?
fair to say,
Yeah.
is it fair to say that within, and I do like the idea of zoning, the licenses by blocks, but is it fair to say that within the 2 block radius, it's generally the most desirable real estate in Leadville?
For
And
some-
so, first of all,
What purpose though?
what I mean by that is that the like prices of real estate in the 2 block radius is pretty high. There's a high threshold to entry. The likelihood of someone buying to live there is, to me, I think, pretty small. The likelihood of someone buying it and leaving it vacant if they can't, short-term rent it is pretty high. So the having a neighborhood argument, I think, is not likely gonna happen.
I live
right?
on the 100 block and we've had like 5 new families move in, so it's a weird mix of all families that have moved in the last 5 years and short-term rentals. So I think both things are true. We've had a lot of people buy on my block that are living there either part-time all the time, like they're up every weekend and very much part of the community, or they're living there full-time. So like Morgan's family. And I live on the 100 block. I moved in there 6 years ago. We have a lot of full-time residents and we have a lot of short-term rentals. So I think we have these like 2 stories that are like both things are true. It's not like this ghost town and it's not just like nobody's able to buy to live there. Like, I think it's a more nuanced situation than that.
Okay, the question on the table is, should we limit density by zone or block? And that should be a simple enough question. After a quick break, Gabby, would you try and do a straw poll and see
Sure.
how everybody feels?
Okay, do you want a density by block?
I would do density by block.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Do it quick. Christian,
Skip.
skip?
Give me a sec.
I was just going not a voting member. You're not a vote, Nadeem?
I am inclined to say yes.
Okay. Tim?
No, I just don't think the problem is pronounced enough to take that rabbit hole down
Mhm.
the road of the administrative nightmare that's gonna pose. So no. Yes.
Myself, I want to say yes, but I think it's a little premature, so I'm gonna say no. Tracy?
I agree with you, Gabby. I don't think it's time yet, so no.
Shannon?
Yes.
M?
I am on the same boat of it's a little too soon and I would want to be really thoughtful. So at this moment, no, but I hope it could be something we work through in the next year or two.
Max?
Administrative nightmare right now, and it's not ripe, no.
Dana, are you able to chime in?
Thank you. Yes, sorry about that. I agree with M. I'd like to take it up at some point, but not now is not the right time.
Mayor?
I think those are very thoughtful responses. I like the idea. I understand that administratively it's a challenge, but I would still be in favor of it at some point.
So what is your vote today? Yay or nay?
My vote is yay.
Okay, and Christian?
I don't know. It makes sense what Tracy said. We kind of need to make sure that short-term rentals currently are even being collected taxes on time, and that administratively is set up in a way that's fluid to make it easier for whoever takes it up. So no.
Or no? So for council members, which are more important than planning commission members, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 no's and 2 yeses.
Okay,
So just putting that out there.
all right. Good conversation, everybody.
But I think a general consensus, it's something that we should
Yeah.
consider
Yes.
at some points.
Correct. I'm an incrementalist and I feel like if we make one positive change this year, that'd be great. I don't wanna have an ordinance that has like 8 changes and make it really complicated and we have like a whole new system in a year. So that's just also.
All right, thank you all. Next question, you know, the table of uses would change, short-term rentals to business license. And that the requirements for short-term rentals would be defined in the business license so that a conditional use permit would become unnecessary. The question on the table is, do we still think that conditional use permits and therefore public hearings around short-term rentals are something we would like to continue? Or are we okay with this being a business license determination?
And I'd like to provide a couple clarifications on that. So currently, we have Title V, which is business licensing, which is houses the short-term rental regulations. We have Title 17, which is everything that myself and the Planning and Zoning Commission work with, which is the zoning chapter. Currently, Title V does include regulations for short-term rentals. So things like parking, trash, noise, nuisances, all those things. Those regulations are in there, and they are enforceable. On the screen is, on the left-hand side is what is in the code right now for planning in the zoning ordinance. On the right-hand side of the screen is what is in Title V short-term rental licensing. I wanted to clarify that right now, the terminology is not necessarily consistent. And as the mayor mentioned, on the left-hand side, with the table of use amendments that the P and Z and City Council reviewed in the November 14th or 15th work session, that is proposed to go away. So it would solely be within short-term rental licensing. I'm gonna go back to that.
Yeah, one sec.
Okay.
All right, now Zoom can see it.
Okay, thanks. So I want to clarify that class 1, which is owner occupied on the right-hand side of the screen, that is the equivalent. So we're looking at 58A, 58B, and 58C. So class 1 would qualify as 58A and 58C. Class 2 would qualify as 58A and 58B. And that may take a second to sink in, but I wanted to provide that clarification. So that terminology is not necessarily consistent, but essentially right now in the code, two or more licenses on a parcel that is owner occupied would require a conditional use permit, and a conditional use permit would also be required for not owner occupied 3 or more.
And the idea of it is, does that make sense to keep? Is that the question?
Well, I think, well, my fear, and I know this is kind of a tricky thing, is that basically then planning commission and or the land use chapter is totally separate from short-term rentals. And I think they do need to be tied in some way because it is a neighborhood use issue.
Yeah.
And so and I don't know exactly what the right path is, and I would have, you know, our lawyer and TJ, the planner that's helping us with that. We don't have to do it exactly how he proposes it now, but I think there needs to be some link between the land use chapter and the business license chapter on this topic, because if it's totally separate, I think it would be tricky if we wanted to revisit some kind of density thing, or if there's a nuisance complaint, or, you know, whatever it is, like, I think we need to keep some link there, and I don't know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah,
whether it's
the
through a
density
CUP
thing would
process.
almost have to be in Title 17.
Right,
So completely separated and makes me nervous.
agreed.
I will clarify that licensing, I mean, communities are doing short-term rental licensing with short-term rental overlay zones strictly through their finance department, business department through licensing, not tying that. In other words, your short-term rental overlay zone is not the same thing as your zoning.
I feel like if we aren't having density control, having neighborhood input makes sense to me. That's just my 2 cents of like.
You mean through the
creating-
CUP process, is that what you mean?
Sure, whichever process.
And there's a very small number that actually gets.
Can you have
It may have
that screen with all the Zoom.
It just seems like it needs to have
Right now, it's having visibility.
totally in place. Part of doing like, just like Title V, just as a business transaction. It needs to be.
Could there be some reference, like before it was, at one point in one draft, it was like an accessory use rather than a primary use, like primary use was residential, accessory use was short-term rental, reference short-term rental regulations, but it still lived in the table of uses. So that it wasn't, there was, so there was still a link there, does that make sense?
That's what's in the proposed table of use updates right now is the short-term rental is listed as an accessory use, but it just refers to Title V for all regulations. And one middle ground that I might propose here as an option for consideration is that we still keep that planning perspective, that planning checkpoint. But it's administrative. So when these regulations that are in the code right now, you do not have a planning director. So I'm here, I'm full-time, and my office is right next door to Hannah. So one option is that you have a planning sign-off. And the Planning and Zoning Commission makes sure that you are comfortable with the requirements that are currently in Title V. If we need to increase those, if we need to modify those, then we modify those. But then when a planning sign-off, just for like a building permit, a planning sign-off is required for your short-term rental license. And all of the requirements that P&Z wants to check for, that I do that. But it's a 15-minute, to an hour review at the most process administratively, and not a public hearing process that requires public notice. So the downside of that is that the adjacent property owners who with the short-term rentals coming in, they don't know that. So that's what you have to consider.
I would like some sort of a compromise position, as you suggest, that would allow administratively, if you become uncomfortable with what's happening with a particular a license, that you have the ability to kick it up to P&Z and City Council.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's like multiple complaints, or there's like a one with, I don't know, a lot of
So
units.
what would
that
the
might-
conditional, yeah,
So like a Title V requirement that we could add as P and Z is, when you do apply for the license, you still have to notify all your neighbors, right?
Well, that
Like-
only applied to
And-
a really small group, which is only the 2 or more units, right? 3 or more units.
3 or more units.
Yeah.
Or two.
So that's why we had those like 10 CUP hearings back in 2021, and then we have had what, a handful in the
Yeah.
last 2 years.
Notifying your neighbors sounds great, but then what is their?
Meaning so that
They
they,
can't really
so that
do
they
anything
can,
about it.
no, so that they could, no,
It's not a public
so that
hearing,
they
yeah.
can then submit, their concerns and it goes to P and Z.
I don't know if there's really a point at that, like.
There's not, I'll just try to summarize that really quickly. There's a divide between that. There's not really a nationwide administrative proper process for public notice that doesn't require public hearing. It's administrative versus public hearing. Would you agree with that, Gabby?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be nice, but I just don't feel like, especially if you're getting notified and then you come and you don't actually have the ability to sway the decision, then it kind of feels empty, like.
A waste of your time.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'd like to
so-
hear anybody on Zoom, Tracy, Max, M. Dana, it looks like maybe we lost Shannon. Nonetheless, any thoughts about this?
Sorry, I made too many emojis. Just trying to raise my hand. This is the question I think that still makes me feel the most confusion, just because I'm still, I think, relatively new to it. And then the last year of being on P&Z, I think the question I have is what you just got to, which is how much does that public opinion really affect the CUP process, and therefore, like, how relevant is it? It has seemed like the ones that I have witnessed are not, they don't actually, like, the public comment doesn't necessarily affect the scope that P&Z is supposed to make decisions with, and there is that disconnect. So I feel, I'm losing my train of thought too, but I feel a little confused about exactly where I land on this, but I do not want to lose all of that connection through the table of uses in code, because I do think that having that link when we need it is really important. That's all I can say.
Great. Tracy, yes, please.
I'm a little hesitant to give up the CUP process. I think we had some really good debates about parking, access, and this is where the density of the neighborhood might actually make a difference. There are, you know, the old Hideaway is more in a residential neighborhood than downtown. If the Scarlet decides to put in short-term rentals, I don't really care because they're over a bar. Who wants to live there? So I'm a little hesitant to give up the CUP process.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, what about here? Still some people here we haven't heard from. Yeah.
I kind of think putting it in the table of uses makes it simpler. But I would be hesitant to lose that process too. So I would think for now, we would just keep it in keep the CUP process in place.
I have to say, I tend to agree with that. I would feel uncomfortable not being able to have those conversations around things like parking and neighborhood impact and I think the CUP process is important because it allows public input. Now, to M's point, you generally don't get a lot of that. So I'm not sure how important it is, but I think that the optics of it are important to me.
I think it's more optics than process. I think with a really thorough checklist and going through the planning process that it can be very effective administratively carried out in a very good manner with eyes on it. I think that checklist being thorough is an important aspect of that.
Okay, anybody else?
I guess for me, it would be the compromise makes sense of here's a very intensive checklist. Do you meet all the checks? Yes, great. We'll just move you along the process because all the questions we would have had would have been answered by the checklist, such as parking, density, et cetera, et cetera. And if it doesn't meet the checklist, or maybe you're a little bit concerned if, does it really check, then bringing it up to CUP makes sense. That way we keep the CUP, but obviously I hate relying on like individual decision making in that sense, because individuals aren't consistent and you might be great at it, but the next individual may not be. So that's my worry of letting go of a system like that is, would it create in the future, not now, I'm not worried about it today, but in the future, would it create a situation in which we're kind of letting someone who may have other interests is just say, yeah, sure, check, and then go along and maybe not go as in depth? Obviously that's a whole separate issue, but that in of itself worries me a tiny bit for these more influential projects, which is what these CUPs impact anyways, is the bigger projects that would be short-term rentals.
David, what do you think?
Well, I will maybe offer my opinion here, just because I'll be the person who is going to be administering this, whether it's a CUP or not. The CUP criteria is very general, and so for example, when I brought the Pink Church project to P&Z, I mean, I had a 10-page staff report evaluating the criteria. But the criteria, for example, like one of the 7 criteria, and this is fairly representative of the other criteria, is does this project affect the public health, safety, and welfare of the community? Right? I mean, so that is the criteria that we have for CUP evaluation. So when you are administering a decision at a recommendation at the planning commission level and a decision at the city council level, your criteria for review is very general. So, I mean, that opens up the idea of if someone says, oh, you've not denied me and it was arbitrary, then that opens the door to be challenged. Whereas on the other hand, the business licensing criteria that we have right now is very specific.
That's helpful.
All right, and there's the opportunity to even make that more specific, so. I don't know if I'm offering my opinion, but my concern is like burdening the agendas with planning and zoning commission and city council. When we have so many things to accomplish, and we just put, 11 things on that we want to accomplish on planning and zoning commission's goals for this year. And, we'll be lucky if we probably accomplish, 2 or 3 of those. But burdening those agendas unnecessarily, or my concern is if it is unnecessary, burdening those agendas when we could be focusing that time on accomplishing other things. If there's the opportunity to accomplish the same thing administratively through very detailed business licensing review criteria. So those are my thoughts.
And would your compromise accomplish that, so to say? Like, would you be able to then administratively handle that? And if there are questions, still go to us for that decision making?
I believe so. I think that's a good point. And so perhaps the key code edit is allowing, which could be incorporated in the table of use of project we're already doing, is authorizing the planning director to elevate the conditional use permit if deemed necessary.
Yeah, because to me, it makes sense. You're gonna do the work, you're gonna know it, you already done it. So I don't see why I would know any better. So I would be willing to trust your opinion on that being the best process or the best way to be efficient and to keep the safety of the community in mind, or keep the thought of the community in mind. So I'm willing to go for that compromise.
Okay, we'll do a quick time check and a thought check. We're doing just fine. However, this one, of all the things we're going to consider tonight, is the one that probably needs
It's
a
time
decision.
sensitive.
What, the one we're talking about now?
Yes, exactly, because we're
Because we're
coming up
trying
on a
to-
table
yeah.
of uses.
It's scheduled for P and Z public hearing April 26th.
Right, so we really need as a group to reach consensus on this particular issue tonight. And I'm swayed by what you said, and what Christian said. Maybe administratively, it makes more sense, especially because of specificity of the regulations in Title V. But that it would give the ability to kick it up if it was a problem. I don't know, what does everybody think about that?
Could that kick up, go either way?
Tracy seems to think, okay, Max, what are you
Yeah.
thinking? M, okay, good. Dana, any thoughts?
She's good.
She's good, okay. I feel like we have consensus on
Yeah.
that.
I think that seems like the way to go.
Thank you very much.
As for number 4, do we even have enough information to discuss this with?
Well, I would say this on number 4. The county's way behind us.
Right.
So I don't think we can allow ourselves to languish waiting
Right.
for the county to catch up. Nothing against, I hope that their process goes very well. I think to some degree, they may need to mirror us at this point because we've taken the lead on this for quite some time. And there may come a time when we want to pull our thoughts together between the city and county once they've gotten further down the road in their considerations. Right now, all they have is a moratorium.
Right.
So that's my thought on that.
I would fully agree. I think for the time being, it doesn't make sense to mirror anything that they've done. We don't know if they're going to use the same thought process as us. They're going to keep other things in mind.
Their considerations are very different.
The could
Right.
So I think it's fair to say for the time being, no.
Well,
Is it worth one thing I was thinking of is that, we spent years on this. Is there any words to the wise, I don't know, one thing I think about, and the county dynamics are so different is most of the building permits are in the county, not in the city.
Right.
So they're having housing, their growth in housing is very different. We're having infill, or we had the annexation with the rail yards, which was a very specific situation. But most of the building permits are in the county, so they're growing in a different way than the city. We're kind of stagnant. So I think that's one really different dynamic. And then also there's a lot of these kind of larger lodge style vacation rentals, in the county, especially in Twin Lakes, up in kind of the Forested Hill areas. I think that's a very different dynamic than in the city where people are on larger acres, maybe not having the same nuisance problems as we're having on our tight city blocks. So I'm just thinking about like, if I was a county decision maker, like, what are the things that are super different in the county that are than in the city that they might want to regulate differently?
That's
So,
exactly right. That's exactly how we're looking at it. The dynamics are completely the opposite of what they are in the city.
except for those neighborhoods right like West Park or like Leadville 7, or these ones right on the edge, which is like, you don't even know you're in the county.
Great thoughts. Scott, any thoughts on that?
Specifically, I guess I was, I know that we kind of brought this up in our last planning and zoning meeting and just kind of wanted to find out where the county is like in process with all this. And that kind of answered my question.
I think we don't know. right
No,
now,
I
so
don't, yeah.
That's just,
I think they've got a lot of work to do because their issues are different. Tim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with different dynamics between the city and the county, so.
Okay. Anybody on Zoom? Max, M, Tracy? Dana? All right, I think we're agreed, at least, we're not gonna pursue any kind of equanimity with the county, but in the future,
Right.
it could be a conversation.
Yeah, I would hope the county doesn't try to do this in a vacuum, because we've been talking about it in our community for years, and if they don't rely on all of the research and the conversations we've had in the last couple of years at the city, like that would just be a missed opportunity.
Okay. Everybody seems to be okay with that for the time being. So I'd like to recap, where we are tonight. We seem to have a preponderance of those of us who feel like a numeric cap is the proper thing to pursue. We didn't decide on what that numeric cap might be. And that may be a future consideration, or do you think we need to nail that down tonight?
It's not gonna change, even if we were to lower the cap, it's gonna stay at 171 because they're gonna be sunsets. I don't think it's.
It
of
is
the
171 for the balance of 2023. That's a
So
very good point.
it doesn't have to be an immediate conversation. I
Okay.
don't think so.
But I think we have to get to it sometime in
Yes.
2023. We can't let it languish. We're going to have to reach a conclusion at some point, and then how we deal with that.
And I think it gives the opportunity for the community to kind of give their input of what they think, if there is any community input on that specific subject. So I think giving us time and not rushing this decision that may be heavily impactful makes sense.
Are we all okay with that? We feel okay about that kind of non-decision at this point, but we've reached at least part of the decision. Okay,
What if P and Z came up with a couple different options, like 150 plus increment over the year, 175, no increment? I don't know, I'm just throwing out random ideas.
Okay.
Maybe got some public input on those different scenarios, and then, P and Z would then recommend one of those scenarios to move forward. And hopefully we would have had enough conversations with city council that one of those scenarios would be adopted. Something like that, does that seem like
I love that idea. I love the P and Z, being an advisory body
Yeah.
to city council would help us, I think.
I think one of the things that would be really helpful is I think qualitative data is helpful, but quantitative data, if there are, there are a lot of assumptions sometimes we're making about why short-term rental versus long-term rental, or the economics of it, if there's any, if there is data out there, and if I come across that data, I'm happy to provide it as well, because I think those are things that if we are trying to make decisions, and if we say, okay, this community, this is their data, and it may not be the same, but it's similar enough that we can extrapolate. That actually might be helpful to get us past some of the harder decisions, because I think we still are making assumptions.
Okay, I would say to question number 2, it's something we feel like as a group, we're not quite ready to tackle at this point, that it is a future consideration, but not right now. Is that okay with everybody? On question number 3, a complicated question. We seem to have reached a consensus that it could be administrative with the ability to refer it up to P and Z and city council.
Right, not check with the city attorney on exactly how that would fall within our code in terms of the authority to make that elevation.
Thank you very much. And on number 4, we have decided that we will not concern ourselves with this too much right now. It could be a future consideration if there's an opportunity for symbiosis between the city and county.
But we're more than willing to help.
Any other final thoughts?
Thank you. This has been very productive.
No, it's
Yep.
great conversations. It is now 7:45 and this work session is adjourned.
And, yeah, just-
Do I need to adjourn?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. The planning and zoning commission meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for
Great work
your
session.
brisk facilitation tonight.